crispy Cantonese roast pork belly. When done right, the skin is shatteringly crisp and puffs up. The meat is juicy and it's interlaced with layers of luscious pork fat. Just listen to this. I grew up eating this dish every Lunar New Year. I remember helping my mom poke holes in the skin while she prepared loads of other dishes. I'm not gonna lie, this dish took me months of testing and quite a few tries to get right. Even after learning from my mom and making this dish dozens of times, I still wouldn't call myself a master. There are quite a few variables that can make or break this dish. But with a little bit of guidance, you'll be able to produce a beautiful slab of Cantonese roast pork belly. In this video, I'll take you through two foolproof methods. The quick method using an air fryer and my mom's traditional oven recipe. Personally, I do use the air fryer recipe a lot more, given how quick and easy it is. But if you have the time, I would strongly recommend trying the traditional oven recipe. It'll give you some of the best pork belly of your life. Both recipes will be linked in the description. Before we begin the recipes, we'll need to talk about what kind of pork belly you're gonna buy. You'll want something that's around 5 centimeters or 2 inches thick with an even layering of meat and fat, ideally 5 layers. In Cantonese, we call this fa yok, meaning 5-layered meat. That's gonna give you the perfect balance of lean meat interspersed with that juicy, tender fat. Ideally, the pork belly you're buying will be stored in a meat display case and not wrapped up or vacuum sealed, which will retain excess moisture. The pork skin should be dry to the touch. If not, don't worry. There's a drying method we'll talk about later. This first method will only take a little over an hour and yields a crispy pork belly that is nearly as good as the traditional method. The only caveat for this method is that you're gonna need this, an air fryer. So I know these things can be a little controversial on the internet because they're marketed to replace deep frying, which honestly it doesn't do a great job of that. But essentially these things are supercharged convection ovens that work great at drying out and crisping up pork skin. Even as a professional chef, I love air fryers. This is definitely my most used appliance in 2023. Now the first thing we'll do to our pork belly is poke holes through the skin. For this step, it's crucial to avoid poking the holes into the meat, as during cooking, the meat juices will rise up and moisten the skin that you're trying so hard to keep dry. Poke a lot of holes. This is one of the most crucial steps to get crispy skin. As the pork belly cooks, the pork fat bubbles up through the holes and fries the skin to make it puffy. You can pretty much use anything pointy to poke the holes. I like using these moribashi chopsticks. After that, we'll flip the pork over and score the meat side, making 2 centimeter deep cuts every 2 centimeters. Now we'll season the pork belly. You can use whatever flavorings suit you, but Cantonese roast pork belly always has 5 spice. I like to brush on a layer of hoisin sauce and Shaoxing wine, then follow up with a dry rub consisting of 5 spice, kosher salt, white pepper, garlic powder, and sugar. Massage your meat to make sure the flavors penetrate. You can even do this the night before and leave the pork belly uncovered in the fridge skin side up so that the flavors fully absorb and the skin can dry out. I would recommend doing this if your pork belly is quite wet from packaging. Next, we'll make a little aluminum foil boat for our pork belly. This will protect the meat from drying out while the skin crisps up. After that, brush a layer of vinegar over the skin. You can use rice or white vinegar. The vinegar helps break down and soften the skin so that it'll puff up more, and also gets rid of some of that porky aroma. Mix together kosher salt and an egg white to form a sandy paste and layer it over the pork skin. The salt crust will soak up moisture from the skin, and the addition of an egg white will make it easy to remove later on. Now place the pork belly in your air fry at 250 Fahrenheit or 120 Celsius for 30 minutes. This step helps dry out the skin and gently cook the meat. Once the first cooking stage is done, remove the pork belly and preheat your air fryer to 400 Fahrenheit or 200 Celsius. Remove the salt crust and look how the skin has dried up. Next, brush on a layer of neutral oil. This oil will help with the heat transfer that allows the skin to puff up and get crispy. Place the pork belly back in the air fryer for 25 to 30 minutes. Check on it every 10 minutes. The final cooking time may vary depending on your air fryer. After all the cooking, we're ready for the hardest part, letting the pork belly rest at least 15 minutes before we cut into it. My mom's traditional oven recipe is definitely a labor of love and requires some planning if you're going to attempt it, but all the steps are relatively simple. We'll be taking what we learned and did in the previous recipe and simply expanding on it. First, bring a pot of water to a boil. Lay in your pork belly and blanch for about 5 to 8 minutes. This step will soften the skin, allowing the fat to better render and also purify the meat, getting rid of some of that gamey pork flavor that some find undesirable. Immediately dunk it in ice water for 5 minutes to stop it from cooking further. This step is optional, but I like to scrape the skin to get rid of any remaining hairs and gunk. Dry it off with paper towels, then poke holes through the skin following the same technique as before. You'll find it much easier to poke holes through this blanched skin than it was for the previous method. Then score the meat side, same as before, making 2 cm deep cuts every 2 cm. I'm also seasoning the meat side with the exact same spices as before. Next, we'll make a foil basket, just like the previous method. Now take about 1 to 2 tablespoons of vinegar and brush it all over the skin side again. This will break down the skin and soften it so that it puffs up more when cooked. Place it in the fridge uncovered overnight for at least 8 hours. The vinegar and any excess moisture will dry out in the fridge. You can even dry it for as long as 2 or 3 days. The next day, the skin should be hard to the touch. Preheat your oven to 375 Fahrenheit or 190 Celsius. Make the same salt paste mixture as the previous method by combining an egg white with approximately 1 cup of salt. Roast the pork belly in the oven for 25 to 35 minutes depending on the thickness. This step will cook the pork belly and dry out the skin even more before the final high temperature roast. Remove the salt crust and set your oven to 450 Fahrenheit or 225 Celsius. If your oven has a fan, turn it on. Place the pork belly back in the oven for about 30 minutes or until the skin puffs up and blisters all over. Check on it every 10 minutes to make sure it's not burning. Now take it out and look at that beautiful piece of meat. Again, make sure to rest it for at least 20 minutes. Now that we've gone through 2 methods, I want to talk about the pros and cons of each. For the first method, it's amazingly quick and low effort. The blistering and puffiness of the skin isn't at the same level as the traditional method, but it is close. Since the air fryer method doesn't have an overnight drying stage, there's still a little bit of excess moisture left in the skin, which inhibits the puffiness of it. Now if we had done a similar drying step overnight, the results from these 2 cooking methods would be nearly identical. Which is to say, getting rid of excess moisture is the most crucial step in getting that perfectly crispy and crackly skin. The meat for the air fryer method also isn't as flavorful than if we had marinated it overnight, and it does retain some of that gamey porkiness to it. Although personally I like that. Now on the other hand, my mom's traditional method takes a lot of time, but the balance of flavors and the earth-shatteringly crisp pork skin make it all worth it. The flavors are pronounced, bold, and clean while the skin is nearly perfect. So overall, as you can see, the cooking method doesn't really make too much of a difference. What really matters to get the perfect crispy pork belly is to control moisture. Through selection of the pork belly, the overnight drying stage, salting stage, and poking the skin so that the fat can render and allow the skin to puff up. Controlling these variables is crucial to get the perfect crispy pork belly.